He cataloged possible exits, one behind him, two on the far side of the ballroom that might as well be on another planet, and a ventilation shaft overhead that he definitely couldn't reach and probably couldn't fit through anyway. The bride stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the slight point to her ears, the only obvious difference between Khyveri and human physiology, if you didn't count the fangs and the silver eyes and the whole immortality situation. She smiled and her teeth were just sharp enough to notice. "You're the courier," she said. Her voice was cold and smooth, like water running over river stones in winter. "I smelled you the moment you entered my father's ship." Thomas's brain, which had been doing an admirable job of keeping him alive so far, decided this was a good time to engage in conversation. "Package delivery," he managed. "I just need a signature. Then I'll be out of your way. Congratulations on the wedding." "Dance with me," she said, and her hand was already reaching for his wrist. "I really shouldn't," Thomas started, but her fingers closed around his arm, and they were freezing, like touching bare metal that had been stored in vacuum. She pulled him onto the dance floor with surprising strength, positioning his hands with practiced efficiency, one on her waist, one clasped in hers. "Follow my lead," she murmured as they began moving. "Try not to trip. You're making history, Courier Vale, and I'd prefer it didn't include pratfalls." Thomas's feet moved automatically, following rhythms he didn't understand while his brain tried to process how she knew his name and why making history sounded more like a threat than a compliment. The ballroom's ambient noise died in stages, like someone was systematically muting different frequencies until all that remained was the music and the sound of Thomas's boots scraping against obsidian. He became aware of eyes, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all turning to watch the human courier stumbling through a waltz with their princess. The weight of that collective attention felt physical, like atmospheric pressure increasing until his ears popped. "You're doing fine," the princess said, guiding him through a turn that he definitely didn't execute correctly. Better than Lord Sectus at his own bonding ceremony, he tripped over his ceremonial robes and knocked over 3 candelabras, set fire to the historical tapestries. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" Tomas asked. His hand was sweating where it rested against her waist, which was probably poor etiquette when dancing with immortal nobility. "It's supposed to make you stop looking like you're about to be executed," she said. Though to be fair, that's still a possibility, depending on how the next few minutes go. The crowd parted as they moved across the floor, and Thomas caught glimpses of faces ranging from shocked to furious, to the kind of dark amusement that suggested some Khyveri were already planning how to tell the story at future gatherings. Near the altar, and yes, there was definitely an altar, carved from something that looked like volcanic glass, a tall figure in elaborate robes stood with his hands still extended toward empty air. His eyes were completely black, no distinction between iris and pupil, and he was watching Thomas with the expression of someone calculating exactly how much force would be required to separate a human spine from its component vertebrae. "That's Lord Vakros," the princess said, following his gaze. "My fiancé. Well, my former fiancé as of approximately 4 minutes ago, assuming you don't lose your nerve." Tomas's foot caught on something, probably his own ankle, and he nearly went down before she compensated, pulling him back into rhythm with a grace that made his clumsiness even more obvious. "I feel like there's some context I'm missing," he said. "Important context. The kind of context that might explain why you're dancing with a random courier instead of marrying the terrifying vampire lord who looks like he's planning my funeral." "There's a loophole in Khyveri inheritance law," she said. The music shifted, becoming slower, and she pulled him closer until he could feel the cold radiating from her skin through his jacket. "My father probably thought it would never be relevant. If someone claims a bride publicly before the midnight binding, she can choose to accept that claim instead of her arranged marriage." "And dancing counts as claiming?" Thomas asked. His heart was doing complicated things in his chest, none of them comfortable. "Among my people, physical contact initiated by the claimant in full view of assembled witnesses is legally equivalent to a formal proposal," she said. Her lips were very close to his ear now, and he could feel her breath, cold, like everything else about her, against his neck. "So right now, Courier Vale, you're claiming me. Every person in this cathedral knows it. Vakros definitely knows it. And my father, who's standing near the gene forges, looking like he's aged another century in the last 5 minutes, absolutely knows it." Tomas risked a glance toward the gene forges. He'd thought they were decorative pillars, but now he could see the faint shimmer of stasis fields and the organic shapes suspended in translucent chambers. An older Khyveri stood beside them, platinum hair catching the light, his expression carefully neutral in a way that suggested significant internal screaming. "I should mention," the princess continued, That I caught your scent when you entered the loading bay. Human blood, untainted by genetic modification or life extension treatments. Do you know how rare that is in this sector? Most humans are so augmented, they barely register as organic anymore. I'm too broke for augmentation, Thomas said. It's not a philosophical stance. It's just poverty. She laughed, and the sound was surprisingly warm for someone whose body temperature suggested deep space storage. I'm offering you a gamble, Courier Vale. Accept my claim, become my consort, and give me a chance at freedom from a marriage that would turn me into a decorative ornament for the next few centuries. Or refuse, walk away, and I'll have no choice but to let Vakros bind me to contracts written before your great-grandmother was born. When you put it that way, you make it sound almost reasonable, Tomas said. His scanner was still chirping from his belt, reminding him that he had a package to deliver and a docking permit that was expiring and a life that didn't involve vampire politics. Except I'm pretty sure becoming a vampire consort involves some significant biological complications, like drinking blood and living forever, and possibly exploding if I go near sunlight. Those are mostly misconceptions, she said. You won't become Kavari. That's not possible through bonding alone. But you'll stop aging at your current rate. You'll heal faster. And you'll be psychically linked to me, which means you'll always know where I am and how I'm feeling, and I'll know the same about you. That sounds invasive. It absolutely is, she agreed. But it's also the only way out of this arrangement that doesn't end with me spending eternity pretending to care about Vakros's collection of preserved historical documents. The music swelled, and Thomas realized they were approaching some kind of crescendo. The other dancers had stopped moving entirely, forming a circle around them, and Lord Vakros was stepping forward with his black eyes fixed on Thomas like targeting lasers. I need to know your name, Thomas said suddenly. If I'm going to claim you, I should probably know who I'm claiming. She smiled, and this time her fangs were fully visible. Myrcella, Princess Myrcella Tharn, heir to the Tharn bloodline, keeper of the Gene Forges, and currently the most controversial bride in Kavari history. No pressure then, Tomas said. Vakros reached them as the music hit its final note, and his hand landed on Myrcella's shoulder with enough force that Tomas heard her dress fabric strain. The temperature in the immediate vicinity dropped so fast that frost formed on Tomas's scanner. Release her, Vakros said. His voice sounded like grinding stone, and up close Thomas could see that his formal robes were embedded with circuitry that pulsed with faint red light. This farce ends now, human. You're interfering with arrangements that were made before your species achieved faster-than-light travel. Myrcella's hand tightened in Thomas's grip. The law is clear, Vakros. He made a claim. I'm accepting it. Vakros's fingers dug into Myrcella's shoulder hard enough that Thomas saw her wince, though she didn't make a sound. The ancient vampire's face remained perfectly composed, beautiful in the way old statues were beautiful, cold, symmetrical, completely devoid of anything resembling human warmth. His formal robes hummed with barely audible power, and Thomas realized the circuitry wasn't decorative. It was some kind of neural amplifier, probably illegal in most jurisdictions, definitely capable of turning a human brain into something resembling scrambled eggs. He doesn't even understand what you're using him for, Vakros said. He still hadn't looked at Thomas directly, as if acknowledging his existence would give it validity. This isn't a valid claim. It's desperation wearing a human disguise. The law doesn't specify species, Myrcella said. Her voice stayed level, but Thomas could feel her pulse accelerating through their joined hands. It doesn't require the claimant to understand Kavari politics or pass a competency examination. It just requires public contact and mutual acceptance. We have both. You have a frightened courier who's going to withdraw his claim the moment he realizes what bonding actually entails, Vakros said. He finally turned those black eyes on Thomas, and it felt like being examined by something that had stopped thinking of humans as people somewhere around the Industrial Revolution. Tell me, courier, do you know what happens during a Kavari bonding ritual? The blood exchange, the neural integration, the complete dissolution of privacy between bonded pairs? I'm getting the general idea, Tomas said. His mouth was dry and his free hand had gone to his belt where his scanner was still chirping. Sounds uncomfortable. Probably irreversible. Definitely not covered by my insurance plan. It's also potentially fatal for humans, Vakros continued. Your physiology isn't designed to integrate with Kavari neural patterns. The bonding process has a 30% mortality rate for your species, and that's with proper medical supervision. Princess Myrcella is asking you to gamble your life on a legal technicality because she's too spoiled to accept a marriage that would benefit her entire bloodline. Tomas looked at Marcella, whose silver eyes were fixed on his face with an intensity that made his earlier assessment of predatory focus seem understated. Is that true? He asked. The 30% thing? 28%, she said. And that's outdated data from before we refined the neural integration protocols. Current mortality rate is closer to 15%, and most of those cases involved humans with pre-existing cardiovascular conditions. Oh, well, 15%, Tomas said. That's much better. Barely worth mentioning, really. Despite everything, Marcella's lips twitched. You're still holding my hand. I'm aware, Thomas said. He was also aware that his docking permit had definitely expired by now, and his speeder was probably being tractored into impound, and he was going to have to file some truly impressive paperwork to explain this to his employer. I'm just trying to figure out if this is the stupidest thing I've ever done, or if it only feels that way because everyone's staring at me. It's definitely the stupidest thing you've ever done, Marcella said. But for what it's worth, I'll make sure you survive the bonding. I didn't drag you into this just to watch you die on an altar. Comforting, Thomas said. He looked back at Vakros, who was watching their exchange with barely concealed rage. So what happens now? Do we fight? Is there a formal challenge system? Because I should mention that I failed basic combat training twice, and my hand-to-hand skills topped out at moderately adequate for bar fights. There's no physical challenge, Vakros said, though I appreciate you volunteering that information. It will make things simpler later. The threat in his voice was about as subtle as a hull breach. What happens now is that I contest your claim formally. Your inability to fulfill the duties of a Kavari consort, providing heirs, participating in bloodline politics, surviving longer than a few decades, makes this entire situation a mockery of tradition. I can do decades, Tomas protested. I'm very good at decades. I've done almost 3 of them already. Marcella's father chose that moment to intervene, crossing the ballroom with the kind of presence that made everyone else look like children playing dress-up. Up close, he was even more intimidating than Vakros. Older, colder, with eyes that shifted between silver and black, depending on the angle. His robes trailed behind him like liquid shadow, and when he spoke, the entire cathedral fell into the kind of silence usually reserved for funeral announcements. Lord Vakros, he said, and his voice carried effortlessly across the ballroom, despite barely rising above conversational volume. You were about to contest a claim. Please do so formally, or step aside and let tradition proceed. Vakros released Marcella's shoulder but didn't step back. I contest on the grounds that the claimant is human, and therefore fundamentally incapable of fulfilling consort duties. He cannot provide legitimate heirs through natural means. Any offspring would require gene forges and extensive modification. He cannot participate in bloodline politics without decades of education he doesn't have time to acquire. And he'll be dead of old age before their first anniversary unless we waste resources on life extension treatments. Those are valid concerns, Marcella's father said. He turned to his daughter, and Thomas saw something complicated pass between them. Not quite anger, not quite disappointment, something closer to tired resignation. Princess, you understand what accepting this human's claim means? You're choosing mortal time over immortal cycles. You're gambling your inheritance on a creature who probably can't survive the bonding ritual. You're throwing away a perfect political match for... He paused, looking at Thomas properly for the first time. A courier who smells like recycled air and cheap station food. Hey, Thomas said. That station food was moderately priced. Marcella's father ignored him. Explain yourself, daughter. Make me understand why you're willing to risk everything for this. Marcella straightened, and Thomas felt her hand steady in his. Because Vakros brought a sealed case to his own wedding, she said quietly. A case marked with medical quarantine codes, a case that our courier here delivered without knowing what was inside. She looked at Thomas. Did you scan it? Even casually? No, Tomas said. Sealed deliveries stay sealed. That's the job. It contained neural compliance implants, Marcella said. Enough for a full bonding pair. Vakros was planning to have them installed during the ceremony. I would have woken up married and unable to disagree with anything my husband commanded. The ballroom's temperature dropped another 10 degrees, and this time it had nothing to do with Vakros. The silence that followed Marcella's accusation had weight to it, like the atmospheric pressure before a hull breach. Tomas felt every Kavari in the cathedral turn their attention to Vakros, and the ancient vampire's perfect composure finally cracked. Not much, just a slight tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible shift in his stance, but enough to confirm that Marcella wasn't bluffing. Neural compliance implants are illegal, someone said from the crowd. Tomas couldn't identify the speaker, but the voice sounded young, shocked in a way that suggested genuine surprise rather than political maneuvering. "They're illegal in Federation space," Vakros said. His voice remained steady, but the circuitry in his robes pulsed faster, throwing red light across his face in rhythmic patterns. "We're in the Kvost sector dead zone. Federation law doesn't reach here, and Kavari tradition permits any bonding augmentation that both parties consent to." Consent being the operative word, Marcella's father said. His silver eyes had gone completely black, which Thomas was learning meant either extreme anger or possibly some kind of sensory mode shift. "Were you planning to inform my daughter before the installation, Vakros? Or were the implants meant to be a wedding surprise?" "I was ensuring the stability of our union," Vakros said. "The Tharn bloodline has a history of instability. Your daughter's grandmother tried to dissolve her bonding 3 times before she finally accepted her place. Your own mother required extensive behavioral conditioning. I wasn't going to risk centuries of political negotiation on the possibility that Princess Marcella might decide she's unhappy after the contracts are signed." Tomas felt Marcella's hand trembling in his. "You were going to turn me into a puppet," she said, a decorative ornament that smiled and agreed and never had an original thought again. "I was going to turn you into a proper consort," Vakros corrected, "one who understood her duties to her bloodline and her husband. One who didn't throw tantrums at formal ceremonies or drag random humans into political situations they can't possibly comprehend." "See, here's the thing," Tomas said, because his mouth had apparently decided they weren't in enough trouble already. "I might not comprehend Kaveri politics, but I definitely comprehend forced neural modification. We have laws about that in human space, very strict laws, the kind of laws that involve prison planets and permanent exile." "How fortunate we're not in human space," Vakros said. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Thomas reassess his earlier estimate of how much force would be required to separate his spine from its component vertebrae. "Tell me, Courier, are you still committed to your claim? Now that you know what you're actually protecting her from? Neural compliance might sound barbaric to your provincial human sensibilities, but it's an elegant solution to a complex problem. Without it, Princess Marcella will spend the next few centuries fighting against her own nature, trying to be something she's not designed to be." "I'm designed to be free," Marcella said. Her voice had gone cold enough to match her skin temperature. "That's what bothers you, isn't it? Not that I'm unstable or unsuitable, but that I might actually want something different than what you've planned for me." Vakros turned to Marcella's father. "Lord Tharn, you know I'm right. Your bloodline requires structure, guidance, control. Without it, you get situations like this. Your heir making impulsive decisions based on emotional reactions rather than political calculation. Let me withdraw the implants from consideration. Let me bond with her the traditional way. I'll even agree to a neural privacy clause if that would satisfy her concerns." "No," Marcella said flatly. "The claim stands. Courier Vale isn't withdrawing, and neither am I." Tomas squeezed her hand gently, then looked at Lord Tharn. "I have a question. Probably a stupid question, but I'm running low on smart questions, and the stupid ones are all I have left. What happens to the package I delivered? The one with the illegal implants?" Lord Tharn's expression shifted, becoming something that might have been approval or might have been dark amusement. "Security is already retrieving it," he said, "along with Lord Vakros's medical team and anyone else who knew about the implants and failed to report them." He turned to Vakros. "You violated guest right, Vakros. You brought illegal augmentation into my house without declaring it. You planned to modify my daughter without her consent. These are serious accusations. Accusations made by a frightened girl and a human who's been here for less than an hour," Vakros said. "Lord Tharn, we've known each other for 3 centuries. Our families have been allies since before the Federation existed. Are you really going to let this farce continue based on the word of a courier who probably can't even spell neural compliance?" "I can spell it," Tomas said. "It's just compliance. That's not even a hard word. Neural is trickier, but I've got it. Neural. Several Kavari in the crowd made sounds that might have been stifled laughter. Vakros looked like he was reconsidering his earlier calculation about spine separation and deciding it might be worth the political complications. "The law is clear," Lord Tharn said. "My daughter has accepted a public claim. You've contested it on grounds of the claimant's inadequacy. Normally, this would proceed to formal arbitration, possibly a demonstration of the claimant's capabilities." He paused, studying Thomas with those shifting eyes. "But given the circumstances, given what you brought into my house, Vakros, I'm inclined to allow the claim to proceed immediately." Unless you can provide evidence that the courier is fundamentally incapable of bonding, the tradition stands. He's human, Vakros said. That's evidence enough. Humans don't survive Kivari bonding. Their neural patterns aren't compatible. Their physiology rejects our genetic markers. And even if he somehow survived the ritual, he'd be dead within decades while my daughter remained frozen in time, watching him age and decay like every other mortal creature she's ever cared about. That's my choice to make, Marcella said. Not yours. Not my father's. Mine. Thomas's scanner finally stopped chirping, having exhausted its battery trying to remind him about package delivery protocols. So what happens now, he asked. Do we vote? Is there a tribunal? Should I prepare a speech about why I'm qualified to be immortal vampire royalty, despite having failed combat training twice? Now, Lord Tharn said, we proceed to the bonding chamber. Midnight is in 43 minutes. If you're still committed to this claim, Courier Vale, you'll need to survive the ritual. If you're not committed, you should withdraw now, before we waste medical resources on preparation. The bonding chamber turned out to be less chamber and more cathedral within a cathedral. A circular room carved from something that looked like crystallized bone, with bioluminescent veins running through the walls in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The floor was marked with concentric circles that glowed faint blue, and at the center stood a platform that Thomas was trying very hard not to think of as an altar despite its obvious altar-like qualities. Medical equipment lined the walls, all organic curves and pulsing membranes, the kind of biotechnology that made Federation doctors uncomfortable and Kivari physicians smug. Tomas stood at the edge of the innermost circle with Mircella beside him, and he was acutely aware that approximately 50 Kivari nobility were watching from the observation ring above. Lord Tharn occupied the highest position, his platinum hair catching the bioluminescent light, while Vakros stood at the opposite end, looking like someone had just informed him that entropy was reversible after all, and he'd wasted 3 centuries being bitter about it. Last chance, Mircella said quietly. Her hand was still in his, and he could feel the coldness of her skin even through the ceremonial gloves someone had forced him into during the preparation period. You can walk away. My father would compensate you generously, probably enough to buy your own ship, upgrade your equipment, never have to deliver mysterious sealed packages again. What happens to you if I walk? Tomas asked. He'd asked this before, but it felt important to confirm before he committed to something with a 15% mortality rate. I marry Vakros, she said. Without the neural implants. My father made sure of that, but I still marry him. Still spend the next few centuries being the perfect political asset. Still forget that I ever wanted anything else. She paused, then added, he'll make me pay for this, you know, for embarrassing him publicly, for choosing a human over him. Vakros doesn't forget slights, and he has a very long memory. How long are we talking? Thomas asked. Like holds a grudge for a decade long, or holds a grudge until the heat death of the universe long? Closer to the second one, Mircella said. There's a reason the Kivari stopped keeping formal enemies lists. They got too long. A medical technician approached, young, nervous, with the kind of silver eyes that suggested recent maturity, and gestured toward the platform. We're ready when you are, Princess. The neural integration protocols are calibrated for human physiology. We've loaded the latest mortality reduction algorithms. She hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, I think you're very brave. Both of you. Brave or stupid? Thomas asked. Usually the same thing, the technician said. She handed him a silver blade that looked like it had been grown rather than forged, all organic curves and a handle that felt warm against his palm. You'll need this for the blood exchange. Try to cut clean. The ritual works better if the wounds match. Mircella took her own blade, identical to Tomas's, except for the faint engravings along its surface. Standard bonding ritual, she explained. I cut my palm, you cut yours. We share blood while the neural integration protocols run. The platform will handle most of the technical work, mapping our neural patterns, establishing the psychic link, making sure your brain doesn't reject the connection and shut down. That 15% mortality rate is sounding more significant by the minute, Tomas said. 14.7%, the technician corrected. We've had 3 successful human bondings in the last decade. The mortality rate drops significantly if the human remains calm during the integration. Remaining calm, Tomas said. Right, that should be easy. It's not like I'm about to perform blood magic with a vampire princess while her ex-fiancé watches from the stands hoping I die. He's not hoping you die, Mircella said. He's hoping you survive just long enough to complete the bonding and then die immediately afterward. That would invalidate the claim without giving him the satisfaction of being right about human fragility. That's somehow worse, Thomas said. They stepped onto the platform together, and immediately Thomas felt something shift. A subtle change in air pressure, maybe. Or possibly the beginning of whatever neural integration process the Kavari had developed over their centuries of perfecting ritualized psychic bonding. The circles on the floor pulsed brighter, and the medical equipment along the walls hummed to life, filling the chamber with sounds that resembled breathing. Lord Tharn's voice echoed from above, formal and cold. We are gathered to witness a bonding claim between Princess Marcella Tharn and Courier Thomas Vale. The claim has been contested and upheld. The ritual will proceed according to traditional protocols, modified for human physiology. If either party wishes to withdraw, speak now. Silence. Tomas's heart was doing complicated things in his chest, none of them medically advisable. Then begin, Lord Tharn said. Marcella raised the silver blade and pressed it against her palm. She didn't flinch when it cut, just watched as dark blood welled up and spilled over her fingers. Your turn, she said. Thomas copied her motion, dragging the blade across his palm. The pain was sharp and immediate, and his blood looked disturbingly bright compared to hers. Red instead of black, warm instead of cold. Now what? Now we join hands, Marcella said. She pressed her bleeding palm against his, and the moment their blood mixed, Thomas felt something surge through him like electric current. The platform beneath him flared bright blue, and suddenly he could feel Marcella's heartbeat echoing in his chest alongside his own. Her fear, her hope, her desperate relief, all of it flooded through the connection that was forming between them. Neural integration beginning, the technician announced from somewhere that sounded very far away. Human subject showing elevated stress markers but within acceptable parameters. Kivari subject stable, proceeding to full bonding sequence. The world tilted, and Thomas wasn't sure if he was still standing or if the platform had somehow rotated 90 degrees. He could feel Marcella's presence inside his head now, not quite thoughts but something deeper. Her awareness of him, her consciousness pressed against his like two frequencies, trying to find harmony. Stay with me, Marcella said, and her voice sounded both distant and impossibly close. Don't fight the connection, let it stabilize. I'm trying, Thomas managed. His vision was doing strange things, overlaying his normal sight with something else. He could see the chamber from Marcella's perspective, see himself standing on the platform looking pale and terrified, see the medical readouts that only Kavari could interpret. With you, at least I get to stay myself. I should warn you, Thomas said, I'm going to be terrible at royal protocols. I'll probably insult important people. I might cause diplomatic incidents, and I have no idea how to be a vampire consort beyond try not to embarrass Marcella publicly. I know, Marcella said. That's part of why I chose you. You looked at me on that dance floor and saw someone worth saving instead of something worth owning. That's rarer than you think among my people. A chime sounded from somewhere in Marcella's chambers. Soft, melodic, probably a communication system more sophisticated than anything Thomas had used before. She stood and walked over to a panel that looked like it had grown out of the wall, touched it with one finger, and Lord Tharn's face appeared in a holographic projection. Princess, he said formally, Courier Vale, I trust you both survived the night without complications. We're fine, Father, Marcella said. Thomas is adjusting to the neural integration. No adverse reactions so far. Good, Lord Tharn said. He looked tired, which Thomas hadn't thought was possible for immortal vampires. We have a situation. 3 more bloodlines have requested formal meetings. The Federation Science Council wants to study your bonding. They've never had access to a human Kavari pair before. And there's a journalist from the Sector Times who somehow found out about last night and is offering substantial credits for an exclusive interview. We're not talking to journalists, Marcella said immediately. I agree, Lord Tharn said, but we need to control the narrative before someone else does. I'm proposing a formal announcement, brief, factual, emphasizing the successful bonding and the political advantages. No details about Vacros or the neural implants, just the story of a courier who made a claim and a princess who accepted. Tomas felt Marcella's presence in his mind, asking permission without words. He nodded, and she said, We'll do it. But Tomas gets final approval on the announcement text. This is his story too. Lord Tharn's expression shifted, becoming something that might have been respect. Agreed. I'll have the communications team draft something. In the meantime, try to stay out of sight. The observation deck has been flooded with nobility wanting to catch a glimpse of the human who stole a bride from Vacros. He paused, then added, You did well, Courier Vale. Both of you did. The projection faded, and Marcella turned back to Thomas with a smile. Ready to face your first morning as vampire royalty? Absolutely not, Thomas said, but I don't think that's going to stop it from happening. She laughed and offered her hand, the same gesture she'd made on the dance floor, but warmer now, more genuine. Come on, Consort Vale. Let's go figure out what happens next. Tomas took her hand, felt the psychic bond pulse with shared determination, and followed her toward whatever complicated future they'd accidentally claimed together. Thomas Vale had delivered packages to stranger places than this, but the cathedral ship drifting in the Kvoss sector's dead zone was definitely climbing the list. He stood in the loading bay with his scanner chirping insistently, waiting for someone, anyone, to sign for the sealed case that had cost him 3 days of hauling through jump gates and 2 uncomfortable conversations with Border Patrol agents who really wanted to know what was inside. He didn't know what was inside. That was the entire point of being a courier. You took the package, you delivered the package. You tried very hard not to think about whether the package contained birthday presents or biological weapons. The loading bay supervisor's station was empty, which violated about 6 different protocols and meant Thomas was either going to stand here until his oxygen reserves ran low, or he was going to have to venture deeper into the ship to find someone with authorization codes. He checked his wrist display. 20 minutes until his docking permit expired, and the ship's automated systems started treating his speeder like an unwanted tumor. Decision made for him, then. The corridor leading away from the bay was lit by bioluminescent strips that pulsed with a rhythm uncomfortably close to a human heartbeat. Kyveri aesthetic sensibility, he'd heard, leaned heavily toward the dramatically unsettling. Everything about their ships was designed to remind visitors that they were walking through something alive and old, and not entirely friendly. The walls looked like polished bone, smooth and faintly translucent, with darker veins running through them that might have been cables or might have been actual circulatory systems. Tomas had learned not to ask questions about Kyveri biotechnology. The answers were always worse than ignorance. He followed the sound of music, strings mostly, with an underlying bass that sounded like it was being played on an instrument made from something that used to breathe, and tried to look like he belonged here. The trick to getting into places you weren't supposed to be was moving with confidence and carrying something that looked official. Sealed cases marked with urgent delivery tags were excellent props. Nobody questioned couriers until after they'd already gotten where they were going. The corridor opened into a space that made Thomas stop walking and seriously reconsider his life choices. The ballroom, because what else could you call it, stretched out like the interior of a frozen comet, all dark stone and ice-pale crystal and architectural flourishes that seemed to ignore basic physics. Chandeliers the size of his speeder hung from a ceiling lost in shadows, casting fractured light across floors so polished they looked like standing water. The Kyveri nobility gliding across those floors moved like they were performing underwater ballet, their formal wear flowing around them in ways that suggested expensive fabric or possibly minor gravity manipulation. At the center of it all stood the bride. Thomas knew she was the bride because she was wearing a dress that seemed to be absorbing all the light in the room and converting it into something darker, and because everyone else was carefully not looking directly at her while simultaneously keeping her in their peripheral vision at all times. Her hair was so blonde it was almost silver, falling past her shoulders in perfect waves that probably required either dedicated servants or some kind of stasis field. Her skin had that distinctive Kyveri pallor, not quite pale enough to look sick, but definitely pale enough to make you wonder when she'd last seen actual sunlight. Tomas was backing toward the exit, deciding that his docking permit could expire and he'd just pay the fine, when the bride turned her head and looked directly at him across the entire length of the cathedral. Her eyes were silver, properly silver, like polished metal catching light, and they were focused on him with an intensity that made every survival instinct he possessed start screaming simultaneously. He'd seen predators look at prey with less focus. The music kept playing, the dancers kept moving, but Thomas felt like someone had just painted a target on his chest in whatever frequency Kyveri operated on. Then she was walking toward him, and he realized she was moving faster than the crowd should allow, threading between bodies that parted before her like they could sense her trajectory and preferred not to be in it. Thomas's hand tightened on the sealed case. This is extremely weird. It gets weirder, Marcella promised. Thomas woke in quarters that his brain insisted couldn't possibly belong to him, but the psychic connection humming quietly in his chest suggested otherwise. The ceiling was vaulted stone, carved with patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them, and through an open doorway he could see into Marcella's chambers, larger, more elaborate, with furniture that probably cost more than his speeder had before it got impounded. His palm still ached where the ritual blade had cut him, though the wound had already healed to a thin silver line. Kyrie healing, apparently, came standard with the bonding package. He sat up slowly, taking inventory. He was alive, which put him in the 85% success category. His brain felt crowded, like someone had installed additional software without asking permission. But he could still think clearly. And somewhere in the next room, he could feel Myrcella's presence. Not quite awake, but aware of him being aware of her, which was the kind of recursive consciousness loop he'd need more time to process. "You're panicking," Myrcella said without opening her eyes. She was lying in her bed with her platinum hair spread across pillows that looked like they were made from woven spider silk. "I can feel you panicking through the bond. It's very loud." "Sorry," Tomas said automatically. "I'm just adjusting. Yesterday I was a courier. Today I'm bonded to vampire royalty. That's a significant career trajectory change." Myrcella sat up, and in the dim light filtering through her window shutters, she looked younger than she had during the ceremony. Less intimidating, more human despite the pointed ears and silver eyes. "We're not technically married yet," she said. "The bonding is step one. There's still formal paperwork, political negotiations, probably 6 months of my father trying to explain to other bloodlines why his daughter chose a human courier over one of the oldest vampire lords in the sector." "How's that going to work?" Tomas asked. "The explanation part. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you chose me to escape neural compliance implants, which is a completely reasonable decision, but probably not the kind of thing you announce at formal gatherings." "We'll figure something out," Myrcella said. She stood and crossed to the doorway between their rooms, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed. "My father's already spinning it as a bold political move. Choosing an unmodified human demonstrates the strength of Kavari genetics, proves we don't need technological augmentation to bond successfully, makes us look progressive and forward-thinking instead of desperate and reactionary." "Is it working?" Tomas asked. 3 bloodlines have already sent congratulations messages," Myrcella said. 2 have requested meetings to discuss potential alliances. And Lord Vakros has been placed under house arrest pending investigation into the neural implant situation, which means he's going to spend the next few decades being interrogated by my father's security forces. She smiled, and this time there was genuine satisfaction in it. "So yes, I'd say it's working." Thomas's new neural architecture helpfully provided information he definitely didn't have before. Bloodline politics, alliance structures, the names and faces of approximately 200 Kavari nobility he'd never met. "I'm getting data through the bond," he said. "Is that normal? Because I suddenly know way too much about the Tharn family genealogy." "That's the psychic link stabilizing," Myrcella said. "It'll even out over the next few weeks. Right now you're getting everything unfiltered. Eventually you'll learn to control what information passes through the connection." She paused, studying him with those unsettling silver eyes. "Are you regretting it? Be honest." Thomas considered the question seriously. He was psychically linked to someone he'd met less than 24 hours ago. He'd survived a bonding ritual that had a mortality rate higher than most combat operations. He'd made an enemy of an ancient vampire who'd probably spend the next few centuries plotting elaborate revenge. His speeder was impounded, his employer was going to fire him for failing to complete the delivery properly, and he was going to have to learn an entirely new set of social protocols just to avoid accidentally insulting immortal nobility at breakfast. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "But no, I don't regret it. Ask me again in a year when I've had time to fully comprehend what I've gotten myself into." "That's fair," Myrcella said. She walked over and sat on the edge of his bed. Their beds were technically separate, but the psychic bond made privacy mostly theoretical. "For what it's worth, you saved me from something much worse than uncertainty. Vakros would have turned me into a political ornament.